Now, if you were to take a boat ride up the Hudson River from New York City for just about 60 miles past the Bear Mountain Bridge, West Point, and a little bit further north of Newburgh Beacon Bridge, and hang a sharp left, you will find West Shore Marina. Go up the hill a bit, and you're in the quaint little village of Marlboro, with its old historical buildings and laid-back country flavor. Don't let them kid you, though. More shenanigans go on in Marlboro than you would want to know about. The policies in town are don't ask, don't tell, and it's easier to be forgiven than to ask permission. Just down the highway a bit, you'll see DB Diner on the left going south, and in the morning, many of the locals will gather there, have a bite to eat, pick up on the latest talk about town, discuss farming, job possibilities, and just complain about anything handy. On one late winter morning, Mark Greiner, one of the local apple farmers, was in having coffee and noticed Brian Siddle walk through the front door. Siddle owned a landscaping tree cutting service and would often sell fresh logs to me for my chainsaw carving projects. Mark told Siddle that the big wind we had the night before blew down a spruce tree and it landed on and demolished one of the field workers' outhouses, and that he thought that Siddle could remove it for him and sell it to me. Siddle was interested and told Greiner that he'd get to it first thing the next morning. So there you have it. One man needs something done, another man makes a buck, and everyone comes out happy. You'd think so. Now the Mayhem brothers were having breakfast just a couple booths over and heard Greiner's offer to Siddle. And being that the construction business was slow at the time, they started cognifying about where they were going to be that night. The Mayhem brothers knew that if they could get the logs in the middle of the night before Siddle got there, they could sell them to me, and it would be weeks before Siddle would put two and two together and know how he had been had. By then, the great log appropriation would just be a distant thought, and you know, it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask permission. So at about 3 in the morning, the Mayhem boys drove their old pickup truck out to Latintown Road to Greiner's farm and pulled in driving up the gravel road where the large spruce tree laid in the slushy snow. Even though the tree laid amongst the ruins of the old outhouse, they still figured they could get it out before the sun came up, and before the cold front was due to come through, and before Siddle got there. The Weather Service predicted they would get snow in the early hours of the morning, and then the temperature would drop drastically from 30 degrees to 0 in a very short time. If they didn't get the logs out before then, nobody was going to get them out after the soft, slushy snow froze into a solid ice pack. So the Mayhem boys worked happily, trimming off branches, cutting the logs into sections, and loading them on the truck. Just about 5 o'clock, their work was done, and Mike Mayhem ran back to get their chainsaws by the crushed outhouse. Well, you know, that snow was slushy, and with the outhouse gone, all that wet slush flowed right into the 5-foot hole that was now wide open and filled up to the top. Being that it was still dark out and everything kind of blended into that two-dimensional gray in that early morning nether gloom, Mike fell in. Even though that had to be one of the worst things that could happen to a soul, the Mayhem boys topped it off by both of them falling in when Robbie came to help his brother out. Finally, the two of them were able to drag themselves out of that cold ooze and get on with their business. The sun was now starting to crest the eastern hills, and Siddle would soon be there to fetch his logs. Even though the Mayhem boys reeked of outhouse, it wasn't all that bad, being that the temperature was now falling through the 20s, and those stink molecules were moving just a little bit slower. Once down the hill and pulling out onto Latintown Road, the rear of the old truck, now loaded down with a ton of logs, scraped the rise of the road they were on and stopped the truck cold, leaving the rear wheels suspended just about a half an inch above the gravel surface. After spinning the tires and throwing rocks, the Mayhem boys finally got out and stood there for a few minutes, pondering their recent twist of fate, and realized fate flows in waves and that their wave was just about ready to crash down on them when they saw Officer Griggs of the Marlboro Police pull up in his cruiser. He saw their truck stuck halfway on the hill and half in the road and figured he'd give him some assistance. After After looking at the physics of the situation, they all agreed they needed to unload some logs to let the bumper lift up and allow the wheels to drop to the ground. Even though their wet clothes were getting real stiff because the temperature was now at 10 degrees, the Mayhems got to work unloading the logs, while Griggs wrote them a ticket for an expired New York State safety inspection sticker that hadn't been replaced since Houdini died. Just about the same time, with the police car blocking half the road and the old pickup truck wedged on the hill, Siddle pulled up in his dump truck ready to get to work. Now, Siddle wasn't very pleased at what he saw and let out a yell as he approached the Mayhems. Being that Siddle presented a new twist in their ever-changing fate experience, the Mayhems stopped working and stood there trying to present their case as the sweat on their brows started to freeze. In the 15 minutes that the Mayhems, Siddle, and Officer Griggs spent discussing morality of stolen logs, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and the Mayhem boys' clothes were suddenly froze solid. I mean, they were frozen. So solid that they couldn't move their arms or legs even enough to take a step. And when Siddle gave Mike a shove in the heat of the discussion, Mike fell back into Robbie, and they both fell down in the snow like a couple dried fish wobbling on the hard-packed surface. With those two laying on the frozen ground cursing and trying to get up, Griggs and Siddle broke out laughing. Eventually, still laughing, Siddle got all the wood loaded into his truck, and with the help of Griggs, loaded the Mayhem boys on top of it all. It was quite a sight when Siddle stopped by DB Diner that morning to get a cup of coffee. Everyone came out to take a gander at the boys frozen stiff on top of that truck. Someone even took pictures. Now, when Siddle finally took the Mayhem boys home, he wheeled them into Mike's kitchen with a hand truck and left them there to thaw out. Soon after, Mike's wife, Lori, came home, and now with the stink molecules moving a lot faster, kicked both of them right back out into the cold. Siddle sold the logs to me, and the Mayhem boys were the talk of the town for the rest of the week. So there you have it. One man needs something done, another man makes a buck, and then there are some others who just seem to fall in the poop every time.